Welcome back to Unhinged and Unranked. Today we're going to be talking about tech wars, AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA in their competition against each other. I'm Eighth. I don't have anything clever to say this time, and also here with me is Slash, who sometimes has clever things to say, and Ross, who always has clever things to say. So, to open, let's talk a little bit about the history of GPUs and CPUs, at least as we remember them, and how have graphics and CPU markets changed over time as we've been gaming. Like, what were GPUs like when you were a kid, Slash?
Definitely weren't as fast, man. Nothing was back then. I remember early on, one of my first computers had a Sapphire AMD. Well, it wasn't AMD back then. It was just Radeon. And that thing had like 256 megabits or megabytes of RAM on it. And that was a lot.
How about you, Ross? What was your history with the GPUs like? Let's open Pandora's box. Get down. Get down, Mr. President.
Pretty much integrated, like not even a dedicated one. Playing those like browser games, didn't have a dedicated graphics card. I mean, there wasn't much of a need for a dedicated graphics card back in the DX9 days. It wasn't really till DX11 that graphics cards really started getting some utilization. Maybe I'm old.
You are old, Ross, but that is also true. I remember being too poor to have Shader Model 3 back in the days, so there was a lot of games I couldn't play because they all needed Shader Model 3. And I had a computer that was older than that, so it was like that limited me to being able to just play Morrowind. That's why I ended up playing Morrowind as a kid, because I didn't have the computer for Oblivion. But Morrowind's ended up being my favorite game of all time, so it kind of worked out. That's a life lesson for everybody. Follow your dreams. Be poor.
Man, I don't remember that.
It was like, I think that was the start of like DirectX 8 and 9, probably. It's either Shader Model 2 or Shader Model 3. So, Ross, do you have any neat history for us on GPUs in gaming?
History, not so much. Pretty much DX11, they started getting used. For the longest time, a dedicated graphics card wasn't even needed. It was really projectors and TVs that started driving the larger footsteps into graphics card design. In the earlier days, other than the TVs, most people didn't have a large enough computer to use a video card. Computing really hasn't been that accessible for a while.
I was reading about these early flight sims that the military was making, and they had basically the earliest 3D virtualization stuff. Like, it's pretty cool. It's like in the, I think, 80s, they made this flight sim basically, and it cost up to $10 million at that time to make it. And like, you look at it now, and it's like, these graphics are really basic. For that, it's like, this was the cutting edge. It looks like BattleBit, basically.
Oh, man. I had an opportunity in 2022 to go to an Air Force flight sim, and it's come quite a long way. It's pretty immersive, like you strap yourself in the cockpit kind of thing, and oh man, it's incredibly realistic graphics nowadays. It's come quite a long way.
All because of Doom. Actually, there was even like 3D adjacent. There's like vector graphics and stuff way back. Like it was either 1981 or 1983 when the original Elite came out. I think that was one of the first games that had vector graphics. Like, oh, this stuff's moving in 3-dimensional space. Of course, it looked super simple, but it's like gamers pushing the edge of technology at that time. A lot of the stuff like that up to like the early 2000s was just them redneck janking this high-tech stuff together.
Well, that's exactly why consoles became so big, is because they actually had that dedicated graphics built in a way that most people at that time didn't even have computers that were that powerful at home. Dreamcast, N64, well, Super Nintendo, I guess, at that time.
Dreamcast was so cool.
That jank-ass control.
I remember a game that, like, I think it was like you had an aquarium and you could speak into a microphone to do something in it. It was like an old aquarium game. I think it was on the Dreamcast too. Like at the time, that was like, oh, this is super cool. I grew up with like the Nintendo 64 and GameCube era, so obviously way more 3D stuff by then. But some of the stuff before that was like, when there was something that was 3D, it's like, oh, this is the future. Now we take it for granted. Now we argue about types of anti-aliasing.
Now it's if it's not 3D, no one wants to play it. Or it's some retro game like that's trying to do that on purpose as a nostalgia factor.
We also have the pseudo 3D of the top-down isometric.
I have like pre-rendered Baldur's Gate 1 era. Back in my day, that's what Baldur's Gate looked like, Slash. Asterion couldn't have looked that good back in those days.
I just popped that spreadsheet open and I'm like, what am I even looking at?
I thought my stuff was cool, and then I looked at Ross's shit, and it's like, look at this fucking meltdown graph.
Yeah,
Did you make that, or did you steal that?
No, I stole that. Those were pictures.
I can't tell what was Ross and what was you.
Mine was just the GPU one, like the price tier matrix, and the master one, which is just a list of like all of the GPUs ever. And it's still kind of incomplete. There's some stuff I needed because I was taking it from different sites, and in their lists weren't complete, so I was having to fill in stuff to get the pivot to work right. But I was basically trying to calculate out like how the price performance ratio has changed between the manufacturers and like over the years. But some of them have kind of junk data, so it only sort of worked out. Like I'm looking at like 2020 era, like when you got the 2000 3000 series, like 2020 to 2022, and you see like this big jump, and then now you see the frames per dollar that you get is like gone back down, but that's not really because of the GPUs. That's more likely because of the game engines and tech we're running it on, as we just throw DLSS at everything.
That's definitely part of it. I mean, back in the day, it was really the CPU again before the DX11, but N64 is kind of into that area. Once you get into more the PS2, that was more DX11. They started to have more integrated graphics, and that's when the graphics card started to matter a lot more than only your CPU.
Yeah, now we're back to getting like CPU bottlenecks sometimes with certain games.
Well, yeah, because not only in the console, but graphics cards were expensive. So was memory. So there was a lot stronger pressure to be more efficient in your coding and not include a lot of excess. We've definitely seen a huge uptick that in terms of the gaming industry as well as just software in general. Because there's so much more to work with, there's a lot less pressure to be efficient with it.
Right. That makes sense. It's like a supply and demand kind of thing.
Not paying $60 for a 1 gigabyte hard drive anymore.
I remember how expensive flash memory used to be. Like even just flash drives, getting like an 8 gig flash drive was like pricey.
Mm-hmm. And when SSDs first came out, it was like $5 or something per gigabyte.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Now it's down to under $1.
Yeah.
Not only that, they're more reusable. Some of the standards have changed. The early SSDs, they had limited number of writes. So like every time you downloaded or moved a file or whatever, that was a certain number of writes, and that was copying. So like if you just straight copied files all day or did a lot of video processing, you could just kill your SSD really fast.
Yay.
Yes, sir. And you couldn't zero it either when you were going to format it for security because it would eat up the writes.
All right, and you don't use defragmentation with flash memory either, do you? That's a hard drive thing.
Yep.
Well, I think you can. I think you could, but that would also consume reads on the thing because that was limited as well as the writes.
Well, the thing about defragmentation is it's moving the files to be more adjacent to each other on the physical disk, but there isn't a physical disk in an SSD. So I guess you can technically defrag it still, like the operation works, but
Just be
But there's no
pointless.
point.
you're not really gaining any latency from having to go from physically one point A to point B because it's all electricity.
Ross, is there, or either of you, and is there any history you want to bring up with the CPU side, Intel's and AMD for consumer CPUs?
For the longest time, Intel was a really strong market leader. They had really good brands, really solid production, and a lot global sales as well. A lot of early computing ended up getting developed in the US, so that really helped propel them up there. They did have a little bit of competition with AMD out there, because AMD has been out around as long, but they were never able to get into the specialized personal computer market or supercomputer. AMD was more in the background in the embedded things, got that thermostat that's probably running an AMD CPU in there.
AMD's been on stronger on the console side though for a long time, haven't they? Hasn't like at least since like PlayStation 3, 360 era was AMD chipsets, I thought.
Yeah, you're 100% on that. They did get the PlayStation contract, and I think they're looking at getting another influx of money from them making the new generation console for Sony as well. So they're looking forward to getting a bit of a bump from that in the future. I don't know when the PS6 that's coming out next, and it's probably slotted for next year or late this year.
It's already time. I guess PS5s are old now.
Kinda, yeah. But the thing
I
is,
haven't really thought about
AMD, they were always behind Intel because Intel is a way bigger company. AMD is a company that researches and develops microchips, but they don't make microchips. Intel had its own foundry, or they don't call it a foundry. They call it something else. I forgot what. But
Fabrication lab.
They manufacture their own chips, whereas AMD relies on Taiwan Semiconductors to make their chips. And then for a while, they did buy a company that produced chips, but they got rid of it, I think, in like 2012-ish period.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't making them the money that they needed. And then a few years after that, they pivoted, and they were in big trouble. AMD almost closed down, I think. They were close to shuttering the doors. And then they came out with the Zen architecture, and that saved their company. And that's what we have now today with those Ryzen CPUs.
Yeah, around early Windows 7, it was looking pretty bleak for AMD there. They had a recent, at the time of Windows 7 first releasing, they had a pretty big flop on some of their GPUs, especially compared to Intel and some of their competitors. And at the time, their CPUs, that while they were good, most of their engineers were still really in the IoT and ICS space. They didn't really have it quite optimized yet for that really high throughput in PCs.
And Intel had so much market share everywhere because they were just more established. A lot of companies were using, and they were better at multi-threading back then too, when that was happening. Until they got to their Zen architecture.
The Zen architecture for AMD really did help pick it up. That helped a lot more of their... it helped their speeds get a lot more competitive, especially with what you just identified, the multi-threading. That they had a really solid base for their multi-threading as of the Zen series.
Yeah. There was a company that they bought, and I think that company is the reason that they were able to develop the Zen architecture. I forgot what it's called. It starts with an X. Xilinx or something, I think. They acquisitioned another company. They bought them for I want to say $2 billion or something like that. And this was tail end of my military career, because that was when I was tracking their stock. So I understand this from like a financial side, not like a deep analysis technical side. But they acquisitioned that company. They were
Linux
experts
with an X.
Yes. So what is it called?
Xilinx.
Yes.
Xilinx,
okay. Yeah,
I guess. I might be butchering it.
Yeah, I think it's Xilinx or whatever, however you pronounce it. That's the company. They got a bunch of experts because that company, what they do is they develop chip architectures, or so they had like a lot of experts that were good at doing that, and that's how they came up with the Zen. And then that saved their company. So they had to invest in that company, and that's why they've always kind of been behind until COVID hit. And then you remember when Bitcoin was getting big and like everyone was building those computers that were mining Bitcoin. They were like set up like 5 GPUs in a row, and a bunch of like server stuff was being used to mine the Bitcoins. That's when their company started making a lot of money.
Yeah, so the thing about a GPU, the GPUs for coin mining, previously, if you were just doing it with like a CPU in your memory, you'd be limited by your motherboard because there's only so fast because the data has to travel between, well, your memory and your CPU. In a GPU, those are both kind of integrated. So by doing the coin mining in a GPU, it was substantially more efficient because the CPU and the memory, as it were all within the graphics card.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I didn't understand that aspect of it. I knew what people were doing. I didn't know why they were doing it. That's why they were making those boards that were like 5 GPUs on one thing.
Some power hungry suckers too.
Yeah.
That just absolutely demolished the supply for GPUs during that era. Like there were already issues anyways. You had supply chain issues and all that, but that didn't help.
Yeah, 100%. I think AMD got another big... Didn't they get another contract with one of those cloud services like AWS or something? Or is that
AWS and Azure are both using it pretty significantly on the back end, and that's more driven by their performance nowadays. They had also a pretty big contract with Dyson, actually. The vacuum company?
Vacuums?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, and actually with Bitcoin mining specifically, they came out with a line of portable heaters that were basically those, what you said is like a small computer board, like 5 GPUs in it, that cranks out a lot of heat. So why not win-win? They sold them as portable heaters, actually. Get a portable heater that makes you money.
Crypto heater,
Bitcoin
brain too
mining
big.
heater, baby. Let's go. Love it.
Heat
bit, baby.
That is brain too big. I just saw one of the founders of Xilinx was Ross as well, was a Ross. I see it's all connected.
It's actually just Ross. That's how he knows all about it.
That's why this is Ross too. It makes sense now.
Works great if you're somewhere where it's really cold. Wouldn't recommend it in Florida.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that. I was like, well, I'm out. It's too hot here.
So, going into GPUs, in an era where interdicting a crypto cartel's armored cars is not enough to obtain a GPU that can play $70 games at more than 30 FPS at 480p upscaled, and the temporal anti-aliasing and specular diffusion gods have abandoned us, perhaps it is time to set aside our decades-long resentment of our console-exclusive imbibing brethren and realize that the real peasants were the friends we made along the way. All right, GPUs. I've never touched an AMD GPU in my life. I've been NVIDIA the entire time. The only time we ever got an AMD GPU in my family was when we went to Best Buy and bought one and tried to plug it in, and we couldn't get the GPU, the computer to boot with the AMD one, so we never tried again. So that was as close as I've ever gotten to using AMD anything. But like, yeah, back to the CPUs. I know they like their multi-threading stuff for the past few years was really good. Like if you're doing video editing and stuff, people would always recommend to get that for their multi-core performance, whereas Intel had the stronger single-core performance. And then, you know, in the GPU space, we've been living at large with like, ooh, we got DLSS and we got, you know, ray tracing and all this. But I mean, AMD has their own versions of that now that sometimes work better on NVIDIA cards than NVIDIA's own systems do. Like FSR works better on the 20 series cards and 30 series cards in many games than the actual DLSS does. Have you guys been NVIDIA the whole time too? Have you guys ever touched AMD anything?
My most recent system upgrade wise was actually to an AMD. Though I did upgrade my CPU as well, so I went the AMD, and so that way I'm not. There's more compatibility issues if you got an Intel one and a AMD the other.
It makes sense.
It's been really smooth though, working great. Does virtualization really well as well.
What do you have? You have like a 7800 XT or something?
7700.
The reason that I don't make the switch is because I use a lot of NVIDIA. I think like NVIDIA Broadcast is filtering my audio. And I don't think that Radeon has anything that does that, but I'm not sure. I don't know much about their product because before AMD got Radeon, like I said before, when I was younger, when I was a kid, we had a few Radeon cards, but I always wanted the NVIDIA cards because NVIDIA it wasn't a question of like, is this one better or is that one going to be better? Like it was flat out NVIDIA was better. It was more expensive though. Radeon was always a little bit cheaper because it wasn't as good. And they even knew that their product wasn't as good as NVIDIA, but it was the only other like board that was competing. But now with AMD getting involved with Radeon and purchasing them, I think for like the first time, they're like just now with these new cards, the 9700 or the 9070 that AMD just dropped. I think they're finally for the first time like kind of neck and neck, and it's kind of questionable which one should you get because depending on what you're doing, like if you're only gaming right now and you're gaming at 1440p, that 9070 XT that they just dropped is probably the best thing you can get for the amount of money that it's at, because I think it's priced at 600 or something MSRP. And yeah, the scalpers are kind of pushing it up a little bit, but it's going to be around 600, whereas its competing NVIDIA card is like $1,000.
Yeah, NVIDIA's always had a bit of the price premium, a little bit same with Intel in the CPU space as well. But yeah, now the price-wise, and performance-wise, it's getting a lot less competitive because NVIDIA is still trying to get that high dollar markup.
Yeah, and I mean they sort of deserve it though because they're integrated with all those production companies like Adobe. Their software works better with NVIDIA because of all those CUDA core things. I don't really understand that technology, but I just know that it makes those programs run faster or more efficiently or something, or they're built to utilize those CUDA core things that the NVIDIA cards have.
So that's a little bit of how they design their software. NVIDIA has generally been incredibly black box. And I mean, not to say AMD's open source, they're far from it, but even down to code signing, with NVIDIA, you had to download their software to even get a driver update. AMD, that wasn't the case. You could download their software, but it wasn't forced. NVIDIA forced you to, and that was the only way you could get their drivers. And they also added these features like recording your screen and microphone, all that stuff. And they do have that in the AMD. It just doesn't force you to install it.
Oh, so AMD's kind of sounds like they're a little bit more consumer friendly than NVIDIA, but that's still kind of working to NVIDIa's advantage.
Be top dog for so many years. I mean, they could kind of do whatever they want for a while, and for Intel, it's starting to bite them.
And NVIDIA's kind of gotten more like into the industry space and away from just the consumer GPU market over time. Like there's so much NVIDIA tech behind so many things, like in television and film and AI and all this kinds of stuff. Like AMD now they're catching up in a lot of ways with at least the GPU front, but some of that's probably because NVIDIA doesn't have as much of a focus on it as well. Like, it's hard to get an NVIDIA GPU at all right now. Even like 40 series cards, which are 2-year-old GPUs. It's like, I've been wanting to get a new GPU. It's like, I might get one of the AMD ones because it might actually be easier to get that than to get, a 4070 for $2,000. It's like, the card's not worth that much, my guy. It's a 2-year-old card.
I think there used to be a lot more of a problem, especially what Eighth hit on earlier, where there was some major chip shortages when everyone was getting their own Bitcoin miners running. But they did take a strategy in their card design to help mitigate that. I definitely wouldn't say solve it, but they did break out into 2 different architectures. In terms of that, they had the Ampere and the Turing. The Turing, it's really like the same card, just they had more stuff unlocked on the Turing. It was better at that virtualized compute for that Bitcoin mining, and essentially in the Ampere series, the software locked it down, so you wouldn't have that feature. So that was great for gaming, where you need that quick performance, really responsive, but not that really intensive processing on large data.
So Turing is for processing analysis and AI stuff, and then Ampere was the normal consumer stuff that they were pushing?
So they broke out the lines so they're no longer, the gamers can't have anything, but I mean, the scalpers are still going to scalp. It helped the problem. It didn't solve it.
For a while, it was cheaper to buy a whole like pre-built computer than to get the individual GPU sometime inside it.
Yeah.
I mean, but that was also because COVID, I think, shut down a lot of the production that was needed in order to produce chips too. So it was aggravated by all those fucking Bitcoin mining motherfuckers, but and then I guess the limiting of that the company did of the releases that they were putting out because they wanted to keep the prices high and demand high. Like right now, I was looking up the other day, I was looking at trying to upgrade the computer, and I was like, well, let me look at what this computer would cost if I built it exactly the same with the same video card, except for like an upgraded motherboard and a CPU. And the 3070 is over $1,000. The card that I have in my computer that should be like $500 to $600 is right now selling on like eBay and other websites for $1,100 to $1,200 because there's just no NVIDIA GPUs, and no one. I mean,
that's pretty wild.
The Radeon ones back then that released at the same time as those, they're not bad cards, but I don't think that they were operating at the same level. But now with this 9070, what they've done with it is, like, if you look at the benchmarks, it's pretty much neck and neck with what a 4080 was putting out, which is the prior generation step up. And then it's in line with what NVIDIA just released. And it's cheaper.
So NVIDIA works really great with Intel because they do some co-development, and they do share some of their like early driver versions to help like their processor be more optimized. But it's funny you mentioned the 4000 series because there's a bit of an odd quirk with that. They kind of fumbled a bit in that transition. It was during the COVID time as well, so people were kind of struggling adjusting that remote hybrid work environment. But with the 4090 specifically, with a lot of the 13,000 series Intel cards, Intel CPUs, there was a large chance of it spontaneously combusting. It had very poor... GPU? Yes, and like your computer just straight catching on fire. There was a bug that caused it just had not enough cooling for the amount of power it had. So just that CPU could give it instructions really fast and it could keep up, but the cooling on it didn't.
Ooh.
There were quite a few lawsuits about that. It looked like egg on NVIDIA's face, but Intel did eventually own up to it, but it did take them about 2 years.
Wow, Wow, so that their CPUs burning up is not the only fucking thing that they've been messing up with in the near past.
Yeah, it's been pretty tough because just around that time as well, it was a whole lot of things that's just really fortunate for AMD. Because right before COVID, around 2018, there was a pretty major vulnerability from a security perspective, Spectre meltdown. Those were speculative execution, and it was good for sandbox escape, which from a security point of view, that is the most terrifying kind of vulnerability you could have. I think you're AWS, you're hosting thousands and millions of customers' servers, right? Wouldn't that, what if one customer server could just talk and start getting data from another one of your customer servers? That Spectre meltdown, it enabled that. You could sandbox escape on shared hardware. So if my system at AWS is hosting 1,000 VMs, you could sandbox escape into an entirely other customer's environment and get their data just because you happen to be on the same hardware. So that was pretty major. And I mean, AMD wasn't out of the loop there. Yeah, it was pretty wild, which is why it was really critical to fix. You don't want that just sitting around on your system. But that was a huge downside for Intel because when they deployed their fix, I mean, a lot of things make it go fast and think of security second, right? That's generally how it goes. And usually when you add the security layer in, there's a little bit of slowdown that happens if you think of it second. But it particularly hit Intel really bad. The way they implemented their fix, it actually reduced most of their processor performance by about 40%. So if you were able to run those 1,000 machines before, now you'd be able to run 600 with the exact same hardware. So that drove a lot of companies to like, wow, do I have to double how many systems I have because we no longer have enough compute to handle this? Where AMD's like, hey, our fix only reduces it by 10%, guys. You actually get the whole CPU when you buy it from us.
Oh, and that's why those systems like AWS are switching to AMD rather than Intel?
Absolutely.
Ew, that's pretty big.
Because Intel hasn't fixed that in modern versions as well. And once you apply a lot of their security fixes, they're getting similar performance, but they're using more horsepower to do it.
I didn't know. See, I didn't know anything about that.
Which leads to hitting heat capacity limits, like with the 4090 of the that was just kind of the pinnacle of they started and now they have started to reevaluate that with some of the fires sparked by the 4090s, as they were like, maybe we are pushing a little too much horsepower through these front buses.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if that has, I don't know much about this problem, but I know that the 5000 series has also had some kind of issue with the connector sparking and getting on fire. Sounds like a different issue, but it's kind of funny that the NVIDIA cards are continuing to have these meltdown, like not meltdown in the way that you were just talking with the security, but with the heating on the cards.
Yeah, with the 4000 series, the late 4000 series, it was sort of Intel's fault a little bit because of the way Intel CPU interacted with the NVIDIA card specifically caused it to catch fire. But yeah, you're right. The 5000 card by itself, it doesn't matter if you're using it with an AMD or Intel. It looks like the 5000 series, not only is it kind of unobtainium to 8th point, but it'll also catch itself on fire and burn the cables.
Yay.
It doesn't look like it's as flammable, like it's not going to burn your house down, but it does look like it pretty much burns the solder off and then degrades performance.
It gets hot enough to melt that fucking connector. Yeah. So I don't know. That has me turned off to NVIDIA 5000 series for right now. I don't know what's going on with them. I'm way more
they've
inclined
been super struggling.
Yeah, it's just, and it's too expensive, man. It's just, and like the guy, the CEO, I forgot what his name is, but he goes on stage and he's a lunatic. He's like, we're gonna make the cards more expensive and everyone's gonna buy them because we're NVIDIA.
That's how Intel's marketing was as well for the longest time. It was pretty wild. To exactly Slash's point, you just want that NVIDIA, man. It's the name. They had a really good brand built. It doesn't. You weren't even looking at the performance. You weren't even looking at the cost. You're like, nope, I want the NVIDIA. And they were banking on that for a long time, so they were able to just charge that price and not exactly deliver. But hey, if all the kids want it, they won't even be looking the other way.
It's like a premium package kind of thing, and they had all throughout the years different technologies in games and stuff that were like the cool gimmick. Like I remember having a 670 GTX 670 4 gig edition and playing Borderlands 2, and that had PhysX, and PhysX was so cool at the time. I don't think our GPU accelerated particles have still caught up to PhysX. Like that was so cool in Borderlands 2 at the time. It's like, oh, the corrosive weapons, look at the goo going everywhere. Or PlanetSide 2 had it. You'd like shoot some of these like crazy particles flying out of them. It's like, oh, this is the most hypest thing. And now it's the upscaling race of DLSS and FSR, and like, I use NVIDIA Broadcast too. Like I didn't even think about that. If I get an AMD GPU, I can't make my voice sound good like this. You're gonna hear the fan noise, laddies.
Yeah,
it's all about the newer ones. They do have it. It's just optional.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'd have to research that because I don't even know nothing about. I barely know anything about Radeon. I feel like now I'm behind the power curve because I've been a NVIDIA fanboy for so many fucking years now, because I didn't even question whether or not I should hop off the NVIDIA bandwagon because they were so good until now. Every time that technology came out, it always felt like NVIDIA was the one leading the way. But now it's, to me, I almost feel like it's neck and neck now. Now I don't know what's better. Because back when G-Sync came out, AMD couldn't do G-Sync. And then they, like a year after it came out, I think they came out with FreeSync, which was AMD's version of it. And then there was monitors that it either had G-Sync or it had FreeSync. And then eventually, like a year or two after that, then both of them had the capability to be either one. You know what I mean? Like it caught up, like the technology in the monitors could do either. And so you didn't have to pick or choose. You just picked one that was capable of doing both, and that was it. But I don't know. It's just now with the price difference and the availability being an issue, and then the cards turning on fire, or the power connectors malfunctioning, or whatever the fuck. And now Intel's kind of like on the decline. So now I'm using an AMD CPU. I might as well buy the AMD graphics card. You know what I mean? Because they probably communicate better with each other. I don't know.
Maybe that brings a better
games
point.
To run good.
Do you need that 5,000 card to make it run good though? I'm on a 3000. I'm on a 3060 right now, and runs pretty good. Unless I'm getting like a really out of the box, just released this year game, it doesn't really stutter. It's pretty fine. I mean, I'm not running it on max graphics all the time, but I mean, with how buggy games are nowadays, even if you do have that graphics, it might be stuttery anyway.
Yep. I'm still rocking a 2080 Super. Like it's playing Stalker on like medium to high graphics, and like it still looked really good. That's an old card at this point. That's a 2019 GPU.
Yeah. I have a 3070 Ti, and a lot of the games like Guild Wars I can play on high settings. But Guild Wars is old.
Guild Wars 1 engine.
I think it's more of the single player games, right? That are more graphically intensive than what we're playing on. I play a lot of online games, which they have to optimize for different things, and graphics isn't the one that they optimize the most towards. And I don't know anyone who plays online games on Ultra, because everyone's trying to get their max FPS. Everyone wants to see that microsecond that person appears in between the door. Well, getting too excited.
I play it as high of graphics as I can get away with it still running good, because I'm a graphics slut. I'm like, I'll make up the difference with my skill. It'll be okay, guys.
I want that FPS to be over 120 constantly. I'm not,
Yep.
if it dips down under that, no, I gotta lower down the graphics. But if you're playing like a single player game like Cyberpunk or Black Myth Wukong, like those games you want to play on ultra because they're single player, right? But I think the 3070 can probably play pretty high, but maybe not ultra on like Black Myth. Maybe Cyberpunk because Cyberpunk's a few years old now, and I think the
Oh, I
3070
mean, I
probably
think it
came
would
out.
load. How many frames do you
Oh
want?
yeah, no doubt it would load, but would it be over the 100 FPS that I'm looking for? Right,
Probably 10
that's
frames.
the question.
10 frames.
10 frames. Yep. So if you're chasing
yeah.
that graphics high, like Eighth over here, you do kind of need the better card. But I feel like the graphics cards have like reached a point where the games are starting to struggle to push the cards to the limit. Like there are a few games like Black Myth, Cyberpunk, Starfield probably. Once the new Elder Scrolls game comes out, probably that'll push it. But like it's just those single player games that are really tasking hardware to the fullest or close to
Star
it.
Citizen.
And
Star Citizen will
Star
eat all of
Citizen,
your RAM.
it wants all the RAM all the time. And now
I got
16
64
gigs.
gig
That's,
RAM.
that's the other thing. You can't play 16 gigabyte by
Nope.
put together 16 gigabyte computers no more if you want a game at a high level anymore.
Yeah,
32
you've
is
got to
standard.
be
Jesus Christ.
page filing the shit out of your drive if you want it to not crash on launch. Like I remember Frostbite engine games being like that, like Battlefield 1. If I didn't have a page file set up properly on my old 16 gig specs, it would crash just constantly. I could play it like 10 minutes and the game would crash. Like it needs more memory.
Yeah, I think this time, I don't know. I was looking at like I told you the other day, or not the other day, earlier, that I was looking at computers and putting together a new build. And I was like torn between the 64 gig RAM kits or just the 32. And it doesn't seem like many things need more than 32. But if I keep the computer for like 5 years, is like, am I going to run out of memory? You know what I mean? And then like, I
Get
know
off my lawn. You never need more than 4 gigabytes at one point.
Well, maybe you know, Ross, or even you, Abe. I think that I remember learning this before, but I don't quite remember why. I just know that whenever I make a system, I always try to make it so that the RAM sticks are 2 sticks, and that's it. Because 4 is not good to have because of something with the way that it communicates with the CPU. I don't know exactly why, but it just can't handle the bandwidth as good. If it's on 2 sticks, though, it's better.
That depends on your motherboard. That's just manufacturers being cheapy. So generally there's like commonly there will be 4 memory slots, but do you actually need a good connector for all 4 of those memory slots? So generally companies will either take the 1 and 3 or 2 and 4 slots and give those high speed connections, and the other ones they won't. So you could use it and it will give you more memory, but it won't be the same latency because unless you have a higher end motherboard, they're not likely to all have the good connectors.
Okay, so I'm not crazy. That is still probably true. But it's not anything to do with the CPU. It's with the motherboard.
Correct. And generally speaking, you will get better performance even if you do have a good motherboard out of like 2 16 gigabyte sticks instead of 4 8 gigabyte sticks. Just assuming your memory and CPU can handle that. It's just less places to put the data, less segmented, goes faster.
Dual channels where it's at.
Yep.
Okay. So then in this case, if I want the 64, I shouldn't just buy a 32 gig RAM kit and then like 2-3 years into the build be like, I'm just going to go buy that same RAM kit and double up my RAM. I should just, if I'm going to get to 64 or want 64, I should just get 2 sticks of 32 and slam it in there now.
Now, if you're doing it by one chip and you're just buying another chip later that is the same make and model, that would work that way if you wanted to defer an upgrade. But you should always have your memory match.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole other set of BIOS problems you can introduce if you start mixing and matching memory.
Yay! Yeah, the first time I have the dual 32 gig sticks. I got 64 gigs RAM, and the first time I had that issue of not being able to boot the computer because one of them was like a little bit out. Instead of having the symmetrical clamps like a lot of motherboards have, it has it where you basically pry it in one side and then the clamp comes down the other side. But the clamp on one of them did not go in all the way, and it's like I'm like, I don't want to push this thing any harder, but I had to redo it, and like it finally got snapped in. It's like, okay, please boot up computer.
I don't like that. Oh, that sounds terrible. I would hate that. Now I got to look out for that on my next motherboard because I definitely don't want no fucking hinging thing. Fuck that.
Yeah, his one side was like straight static, like literally just a block. That part you couldn't pull it out. Like you can't get it out of the way. You just have to just slam it in there, Netrunner style. Pray for the best.
Fuck that. You know what makes me nervous? Those I think it's AMD that does this. I'm not sure if Intel does it. I can't remember, but there's like a little stick so you put the CPU there onto the socket, and then you put this thing down onto the CPU on the top of it, and then there's a stick that puts the pressure for the AMD chips. And I swear to God, every time I push that fucking stick down and it starts to get hard, like I feel like it's gonna snap off and like pop off. And I'm like, ooh.
So maybe dating myself a little bit, but that is the significantly improved version. As much as you may not like that push down version, there used to not be an ARM. So if you looked at the bottom of your CPU, there's just a whole lot of connectors, right? And where you're putting it on is a lot of pins. In earlier models of CPUs, the pins were on the actual CPU, and there were hundreds of little slots you had to put your CPU into. And there wasn't that little arm. You kind of had to punch it down. And if one of those little pins bent, it wasn't working. At least this way, the connectors are, and you're just kind of pushing it down onto the connectors, significantly lower chance of breaking your system.
It doesn't feel like it. To me, it feels like just another thing that could go wrong. Like, what if you'd push it down the wrong way, or it's not seated in there right, and then you somehow just jam it in there somehow? But that's what it feels. It feels like you're forcing the stick down, like where it shouldn't be trying to go. It gives you resistance, like towards the end, and you're like, "Oh my God, am I fucking this up? Is this supposed to feel like this, or like?"
Yeah, but if you need to change it or something later, it pops right back out. You don't have to rip those possibly now
aggressive eject.
Yeah, that
it does kind of pop out very easily when you lift it up. It's like it feels like a spring, like it wants to come out.
Well, with some of the older ones, they'd corrode some in it too, so you might not even be able to get it out if you wanted to.
So that's why they have the fucking Battlestar Galactica launcher to get it back out.
It's a lot easier from a repair point of view for that little arm.
It is stressful though, messing with your specs. Is like, okay, everything clean. I don't want to press it too hard. Oh, the stick's kind of bending. Oh, I don't like that. Just click in, man. Just click in. Make it easier for both of us. My CPU has it's air cooled, but it's an old i9 9900, and it's just has a absolutely massive air heatsink to the degree that the whole thing's tilting a little bit the entire time. Like when they built this, it's a pre-built computer, but there's so much weight on this fucking Boeing engine that they slapped in there that the whole thing's kind of slanted. And I mean, it cools very good. One time to get 2042 to run better at launch, I overclocked the GPU to 5 gigahertz with air cooling, and it worked fine. But it's because there's this massive jet engine just pulling the whole chassis down.
Yeah, sometimes the components are so heavy now, like you need to get the little things that hold them up. Like I have this thing, and this is a little thing that you can unscrew like this, and you put it
Yeah.
under your graphics card, because if the graphics card is in the slot and it starts to like kind of it's too heavy and it starts to bow the port, you need to push it up with something. And so now they started making these for people. And this one's too little. It's actually much too short for my current build. But
Too
I have
kawaii.
bought another
Ooh.
one. And it sounds like you're experiencing that with your your CPU cooler. I think I know what you're talking about, because I used a build that had a Hyper 212 cooler on it, and those are really big.
Yeah.
I think that's a cooler that's a heat sink that's sandwiched in between two fans.
Remember, ladies and gents, keep your life RTX on.
Yeah.
All right, now we're at the part where, Ross, what is the absolute nerdiest shit you can think of? I'm sure you have like a lot of deep tech stuff in here. Get in on all of it. Tell us about architectures. Tell us about what is this? What is a RISC-V processor? Tell us what a RISC-V processor is.
It's only the newest, coolest thing. So we've been talking this whole time about Intel and AMD. That's pretty much x86 and ARM processors in terms of their architecture.
Right.
But RISC-V or RISC-V is a newer one. Unlike the other ones, which are let's do with our speed first and then security second, RISC-V is a security first processor design approach. And as such, it doesn't suffer from things like Spectre meltdown and those sorts of things after the fact, because they got it in beforehand. And there's just so many layers of security. Not to say you can't exploit it, but they're substantially harder to. That being said, they're significantly newer. Like the first ones for RISC-V started getting practical use. Like they weren't even developed till about 2012. First one started debuting in the first major Linux version, I think Debian, in 2018. And just recently, there's been a lot of cloud computing initiatives just with current events. RISC-V is actually, the European Union just made a pretty big investment there. They're looking at building their new data centers for AI computing, whatever else, with RISC-V architecture. So, and unlike the others as well, RISC-V is open source.
The RISC-V is less risky.
Yeah, and just
I'm
from
sure nobody's made that joke before.
I could see them competing with AMD quite a bit, because just architecturally speaking, x86 and ARM, like, here's your package, that's it, it's kind of black box. AMD's starting to go a little bit to where you can modify it and get your extra widgets, have another plugin, extenders for your architecture to let it do different things in better or worse ways. But that's all that RISC-V is about, because security first, you want just the right amount of least privilege. You want enough to do what you need and not anything else. So it tends to be very plugin focused and lets it work incredibly well for specialized equipment, like especially in like lab equipment or like a crane. You're doing a supply chain, you're getting your conveyor belt timing right. It's got a lot of potential in those spaces.
It's super modular then.
It's modular. That's a great word for it. It's incredibly modular compared to the other ones. And being open source instead of black box like the others, it really lets everyone dig into the code and make their own modules, to plug it in to do this, do that. And some of their modules with the RISC-V architecture have general availability, not yet. This is still in labs, but they're starting to outperform x86 and ARM in AI computing.
I didn't even know about that stuff. That's actually pretty cool.
RISC-V, or is that the name of the processor?
RISC-V, it's the architecture that the processor would use. So whenever kind of what you were saying, like Intel made their own chips as well. That's the actual micro architecture a little bit with it. But yeah, and they would still buy the chips, then they would put their micro architecture on, then they would sell it with warranty and their information from there. But with RISC-V, if you just want to make processors tomorrow and you found the chips, you could load it with RISC-V microcode.
So is that what they're doing? They're gonna get TSMC to make the chips, and then they're gonna put their architecture on there, and then that's what they're gonna sell to. I'm assuming governments. It sounds like if it's security focused, it would be like more of a government contract.
Yeah, primarily governments and. Well, there's anywhere in the supply chain, really. Like even think of a washing machine. Even that would be probably a more way that you would see it in your home. It could do a microwave really well, though there probably isn't enough specialized need to do that. AMD's got a pretty solid market share there. But because it's open source, that can be an extra cost cutting. If you have the expertise in-house, then you can just slap whatever on your chip, make it a lot easier, and you're not having to pay those royalty fees to Intel or AMD. Well, and we more like licensing fee, right? Because you still need the license to use it in your product, but I guess royalties might kind of be the right word too. Oftentimes they'll get some kind of discount if they'll use our chip in your systems, and we'll give you a little bit of a discount on it.
That RISC-V, what you're describing, is reminding me of something else I was researching recently since January, because in January Trump announced that project, the AI project that the government's going to start funding with the guy from OpenAI. Forgot what it's called. Stargate project. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
So if you're not tracking Stargate project is thing the government's doing now. I think they've been planning it since like 2022 or something. It's an AI project that they're going to start funding with like a $500 billion fund. And the OpenAI guy is involved with it. I think one of the guys from Oracle. And yeah, Sam Altman is the guy, OpenAI guy. And there's another company that's also partnering in this trio.
SoftBank, Oracle, and MGX.
So they're going to do like a big AI project. And there is a company, I think it's a UK-based company, but it's a bunch of Japanese people. It's called ARM. Those people are going to probably be the ones giving them their chips. And so I've been researching the company and following it because it's something I might invest in if they get the contract, because the $500 billion fund, I think it's over like 4 years or something. They're going to invest that amount of money into that project. And probably a large portion of that is going to go to that company if they get that contract, or whoever gets the contract. So I'm just monitoring it. And I think the reason they were getting it.
ARM is what AMDs are built off of. So that would be really good for AMD as well, because that would support more use of ARM. That ARM architecture in general, it does roughly the same compute, like nowadays anyway, that you can get the same output either way, but it uses less power and outputs less heat.
So that's a big deal for at-scale stuff like servers and AI and things then.
Oh, it's huge. Data center cooling is a beast.
That's why AWS uses so much. I think like 50% of their CPUs are based off of that ARM stuff.
Yep.
And they use AMD CPUs, so that kind of makes sense. I didn't know that there was a partnership between, or a dependency between AMD and ARM.
Yeah. And actually, that current event project that you mentioned, something about Intel and AMD, they are both American companies. American intelligence agencies tend to have backdoors to American companies. RISC-V, on the other hand, is not. So that's part of the European Union's motivation, is having a secure and separate architecture that, since it's open source, it would be significantly less likely to have any kind of backdoors.
Okay. So, but this Risk V thing is sort of like what ARM's platform does, because that's what the benefit of that ARM platform thing is too, is that it's somewhat modular and you can customize it for whatever it's being used for, right?
Actually, yeah, you're pretty spot on. In fact, it literally is based on ARM. The ARM that AMD uses today is like ARM 2 and ARM 3. Risk V is actually kind of based on ARM 4, which never really happened, and it just kind of got turned into Risk V.
Okay, so then what company is? Well, it's OpenAI, so it's open to anyone. I don't under, who's making the Risk V.
It's open source.
Yeah, but
Whoever
somebody
wants to
developed
contribute.
it.
Somebody's
who was the
developing
person
it
that
though, right?
came up with it?
Is there a primary developer?
Like, is there a company that I can find like a stock ticker for this
No,
Risk
because
V?
it's open source. That's the G. There's open source means there is not a company associated with it. It is community developed. It was first from University California, Berkeley in 2015, as well as a Swiss nonprofit. They help fund a lot of it now since 2019. Open Risk means it is Open RSISC is their licensing type, and it is a type of free licensure. There is no company you pay royalties for this. So
why did they
unlike it's decentralized.
How do they get money? How did the people that came up with it gain some kind of monetary gain?
They don't. They're researchers. That's their field of research, and they're doing it to drive computing. It's not to drive profit. It's to drive better products. Linux as an operating system is open source. There are numerous projects that are open source and free and maintained operating systems. You don't need to buy a Mac. You don't need to buy a Windows. There's a lot of free operating systems that are open source and essentially maintained by people around the world in their free time. Some people actually do have jobs in this. CentOS is an easy example. That's an open source operating system, but if you want to pay for it, you can get Red Hat from Red Hat. They take CentOS and they juice it up and put some glitter on it and sell it to you with some enterprise bloatware on it. So you could pay for a license on some Linux systems, but I mean, think about it another way, because Linux is a lot more common in embedded systems. Like, do you really want to be running a full ass operating system on like your thermostat? Like, do you want all of those extra vectors?
Do you want to be playing Skyrim on your fridge?
Yeah, I mean, like you could, but you don't need to.
Yes, we do.
So
we must go further.
So having a Risk V architecture, especially being so modular, it makes it way more accessible and easier to specialize. Because you're not having to pay that extra chip. I mean, you'd still be paying some company to do the chip, but if you're designing your own product, you might have your own engineers that are just applying the microcode to the chips you brought from CSMC.
I see. So that would be the thing to look out for, is to see which companies are utilizing Risk V as their architecture for their chips. And because that's going to be the next big thing in the EU market.
It's going to be huge in the EU market. They just did a huge contract on that for AI computing, and that was with the another recent research project with one of the add-ons for Risk V, or modules, I guess. It performed incredibly well in a lab environment on AI computing workloads, better than ARM.
Ooh, okay.
But again, it got to get general availability, right? There's a lot of cool stuff going on in labs, but will it apply?
Will become practical. We must reach the singularity quicker.
There's a whole big world of open source software out there. It's great to check out. And very little in the way of open source hardware. Risk V is a little more unique in that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Hardware, I mean, obviously, because it generally requires, manufacturing is probably why there's not really open source hardware that much. But that still sounds like it'll be a pretty big deal. I imagine it'll be a big deal for America too, even despite the ARM thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the government's going to use it.
No, it absolutely doesn't, because with anything the government uses, it has years more of regulations and compliance checks to go through before it can get there.
One of our viewers brought up wanting to talk about a TDP draw for GPUs. What are your thoughts on TDP, Ross? Trends. I was just looking at the chart we made, and like because of the 90 series, like the 3090s and 4090s, you see NVIDIA's like just massive jump in the average TDP for that generation, like 406 here for 4090 has 450.
Well, it's just really kind of an estimate of how much heat it's supposed to effectively give off, right?
Right.
As we kind of touched on a little earlier with some of the 4000 series, they're not super high in the TDP, but that's because they're also not effectively getting their heat out in a way that can be cooled. Instead, it's burning the wires instead of getting all the way to the part that is touching the cooling system.
Good thermal design.
But yeah, it's just TDP is thermal design power. It's really kind of a magic number to say how much cooling do I need. So you would look up what kind of cooler do I need for my GPU. You want to make sure that your cooler is able to cool enough. It has an equal or higher than TDP number than your GPU. Otherwise, you would expect to probably have overheating issues.
I felt like for a long time, wasn't it that it was either AMD stuff that their cards ran hotter, didn't they? Or was it NVIDIA's that always ran hotter? I feel like one of them was a lot harder to cool.
It was AMD that ran hot, but that's now like completely changed, because now AMD is a lot cooler than NVIDIA cards are. And NVIDIA, like we were talking about earlier, is having those issues with the power connectors getting too hot.
Though that is less in laptops. Laptops, I'm not sure which is more leading in the heating space, but in terms of desktop and server architecture, that's definitely correct.
I think with that 40 series, it had a problem with the connectors melting. But I think it was because the 40 series was the first generation, and I could be wrong about that. It might have been before that. I can't remember. I want to say it was the 40 series that did the hop to the that 12 pin connector instead of using the I think it was an 8 pin before, and then you could like plug in another 8 pin, so it was a double 8 pin. Now there's a new connector as of the 4000 series that's causing an issue with the power, and I think the new cards are like up to 400 watts or something like that, or it's definitely over 300, but I think some of them, when they're overclocked, are pushing to like 400 watts, which is practically half of the power that the power supply is able to output is going straight to the GPU now.
So they up the wattage, but then the connectors, there's less pins on those connectors unless they're somehow more efficient in another way. Then they're like lower, in theory, lower bandwidth on those connectors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much what you got the overheating from, is the CPU overhead of going back and forth between all of this extra power draw that it's not used to. Because before it was maybe 20-30% of power went to your GPU, but as you're saying now, it really is closer to 50%, sometimes more. And the motherboards aren't always designed to handle that. And in some of the 5000 series, not all the chips are handling it quite either, though the motherboards tend to be handling it a little better. They did a little bit of lane shifting and how the power gets there.
There's only even the lower tier 5000 series out right now, right? Like it's 5070.
If you can find one in stock. I mean, they theoretically exist.
You can't. But yeah, all of the NVIDIA cards theoretically exist, but good luck getting one. But like these aren't even the big flagship like a 5090 kind of thing yet. These are in theory the lower tier ones that are still having this issue.
Yeah, let's just wait until I think they're releasing those in the fall, so probably like around October we'll start to see those drop, and I'm sure those are going to be pushing crazy high on the power front. They're probably going to be like 500 watt pulls from the so you're going to need to have a beefy ass power supply for those if these 5070s are any indication. They're already pretty high as it is.
5090 is going to be like, so you wanted to play Stalker on high graphics? Well, it can be even more immersive if your computer emits a radiation zone of its very own.
Striving for immersion.
5090, it can perform fusion now. All right, well, thank you for listening to us being nerds again, talking about GPU, CPU, and the hardware between all the major manufacturers. And we'll see you again next week when we resume with the history of browser games and the technology behind them, back when Adobe Flash still existed, and Shockwave, and Java games for things like RuneScape, and early Unity engine, which could run games in the browsers, and all of those good games before mobile gaming happened, before Fruit Ninja set humanity on a different course.
Till next time.